that hum coming from here, or is that something happening to my ear? I think?
We're hearing
No, good.
it. All right.
When in doubt, hit something. Work. Thank you very much, Harold, for the introduction. Celeste, a very inspiring presentation, and I want to thank the Montana Historical Society for inviting me here. 3 years ago, I was the sub on one of the presentations in Helena, and ever so kind for the society to invite me back with top billing. And it certainly is a pleasure and an honor to be on this agenda with these two lovely individuals. Oh, enough of smoothing it over, right? Let's get down to brass tacks. I want to speak, and this is, in a sense of the word, a paid commercial, courtesy of the Society. As Mr. Gray indicated, I am the founder and head worker, as they say, along with two other of my fellow tribesmen, Dorothy Stillsmoking and Edward Littleplume. And approximately 5 years ago, we founded the Piegan Institute, which really is the Americanization, in reality, the French version of our original name, or our primary name, which is Piegan. And Piegan, just in terms of sign language, since it was referenced earlier, is this. And we belong to a confederacy, you may or may not know, consisting of the Kainai, which are the many chiefs or the Bloods located today in Alberta, the Siksikawa, which are the Blackfoot people, and incidentally there's always controversy. People say, are you the Blackfoot or the Blackfeet? Blackfeet was a name really bestowed officially upon the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council, which is the governmental legal arm of the Blackfeet tribe. Within the language, when you are speaking with other members of our confederacy, they will refer to us as Piegan, or more specifically, Amskapi Piegan, or South Piegans. It's interesting, when they first, when the Frenchmen, encountered the Confederacy members, they called him Nititapa Piegan, or real white person. And I guess later on, the white people they encountered were simply white people. So the name then came from the French, because the French, you know, they put a twist on everything, you know, that. And they couldn't say Piegan, and they said, what do you think? You know, Piegan, Piegani, and it gradually evolved into Piegan. Oh, incidentally, the other member of our confederacy is the North Piegan, or North Piegans, located near Pincher Creek, and they are referred to in our language as Apatos Pieganiks. In other words, they backed up their horses when the line came across. One other thing. Those of you that have watches, will you wave at me about
In about 15 minutes.
in about 15 minutes, all right? and I'll get carried away, and I'll think you're, you know, really inspired, and I'll wave back. Let me know, please, someone. And let me get on with what I'm after. November 11th, we're hoping, November 7th, we are hoping at the culmination of a very long lobbying effort by the part of Piegan Institute, by the part of other groups associated with us in our society called the Native American Language Institute, and we're about 2,000 strong, located throughout North America, and primarily Native American speaking, including the Native Hawaiian group and the Maori of New Zealand. 5 years ago in Native American Language Institute, we agreed, after studying locally our own languages, that most Native American languages will disappear by the year 2050. And the World Indigenous Council of Canada, composed of elders, Native American elders throughout Canada, in their report 3 years ago, indicated that they were very disappointed and obviously very upset at the ultimate demise of the majority of the languages of North America. On November 11th, we are hoping that President Bush will find it in his power and foresight to sign our bill. And our bill has recently passed the Senate and the House by a very wide margin. It took them 70 seconds to pass the bill, on which we had lobbied approximately 4 years for. This bill essentially is to preserve, promote, and protect native languages. It carries no money attached to it, so rest assured, you know, my taxes. And it is essentially much along the line trying to encourage people to take an interest in native languages along the same line of thought that we take interest in preserving other species and forms of life. Native languages are living embodiments of the thousands and thousands and thousands of years and the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people that spoke them. And we are in very serious danger in the very near future of losing all of these language. For example, in Montana, the Gros-Ventre tribe has a total of 22 speakers left on earth. And they are all, as you can well imagine, quite elderly. This summer, Piegan Institute, one of the activities we do is we go to many, many communities, and we have gone to Hawaii, we have gone throughout Canada and throughout Montana primarily, and we produce a lot of workshops with Native peoples, showing them the logistics as well as the techniques for preserving their languages, at least beginning to preserve them. I often say in my presentations, you know, including myself, we're very generous when someone passes the hat and asks us to save the trees, save the whales, save the darter snail, save a vine, because we all, in fact, embrace the idea that life is sacred. It's rather uncanny right now that yet when we begin to ask people to embrace the idea of saving a native language, the reaction is much, much different. Because we fall into the trap of the politicalized educational systems of 1900 and the Americanization of America, not only for Native Americans, but by every immigrant that ever came to the shore. And we often start off our presentations when we in fact have adequate time to get to the heart of the matter by asking anyone in all audiences that we encounter, those of you that have a grandparent that spoke another language other than English, please raise your hand. And we invariably get plenty of hands. And one of the really inspiring people that we met when we were attempting to decipher how we wanted to go about saving a native language was a nice gentleman from the Sons of Norway. And anybody familiar with that group? Am I stunning you? You're all sort of, you know. And he said, he was so nice about it. I was in the Missoula Fairgrounds during the state fair over there, and I was walking along near his stand, and he waved me over and he said, would you like to have some food here? And then he asked me if I wanted to join the Sons of Norway. So I'm going to start off the Sons of Piegan and get them in there. And I said, well, what do you guys do over there at Sons of Norway? And he said, oh, we eat Norwegian food, we speak Norwegian language, we dance Norwegian songs. I said, well, we do that too. We call it, powwows on Indian days. But he told me a story. He related a brief story to me, and that was essentially that as a young man in Missoula County schools, he was admonished and punished for speaking Norwegian. And it was made very clear to him that he should speak English. And so I think all groups in America have gone through this process. And one of the processes and results that we have found that's extremely inspiring to us is always about fourth generation. Here pops up this little Norwegian kid, or this little German kid, or this little Blackfeet kid, or this little Cree kid, and they go, "Hey, Mom, you know, how come I can't speak like Grandma?" And this is a phenomena that is part and parcel of Americanization and Americana itself. In spite of the fact that we all may want to become that bland, opaque, idealistic American whose roots can be traced back no longer than the previous generation, and the idealism that we seek towards that, we invariably end up like places like this, trying to dig around in the old cast-offs of our own past. Native languages, particularly Blackfeet, are extremely inspiring to study. In fact, languages in general are inspiring to study. And I often wonder, in this case, in time and age, when we cast off so much of the best things about ourselves, and one of the best things about all of us was our languages, and yet we did little to protect them or to save them. The Blackfeet tribe right now is, like other tribes, in serious jeopardy of losing their language. And we certainly then, at that point in time, will see the end of a spectrum of development, as opposed to looking into the center of it and saying, I wonder what will happen when the day comes when these people no longer have their land or no longer have their identity, or no longer, all of these scenarios that we so often read about and sometimes, in fact, embrace. The Blackfeet language itself is so uniquely different after you study it and you speak it that you become quickly able to realize that each language presented a different form of thinking for the people that spoke it. And that language itself often held the key and the gems and the beauty that was spoken to earlier in regards to the same discovery, obviously, Mr. Linderman had made, and many, many others, incidentally. And people say, oh, well, I can't become fluent overnight, so I don't want to mess with it. So we often encourage people, study the language. It's not necessary to become fluent overnight, to enjoy it. How am I doing time-wise? Anybody help me out here?
7 more minutes.
7 more minutes, my gosh. All right, good enough. I can count that way. I'll just hold my hands up and go like this, you know. Somebody count to 60 for me. Why don't somebody just loan me and buy me a watch, yeah. So, quickly enough, back to the point. So here we are in America, in Montana, languages disappearing all around us. When Columbus got here, it is estimated there were between about 3,000 to 4,000 languages and dialects in North America. By 1900, about 250 to 300. By 1990, 200. By 2050, 5. So, it's imperative that we somehow do something about this. And as I said, 5 years ago, the Piegan Institute was one of the results of an accumulation of effort after having attended the Native American Language Institute and embracing their ideas about saving languages. We hope, not necessarily to bring back languages to the forefront, but certainly bring them back in a sense of the word that we consider them academic and intellectually stimulating, as well as spiritually involving individuals that partake of them. And I can honestly share this with you. I grew up in a home where the Blackfeet language was spoken by both my parents and all those around me. And we likewise find this phenomena in other homes as well, non-Indian homes. Grandma speaks French. Her daughter is sent to school, admonished not to speak French, to speak American. The daughter can understand French, can't speak it, and then her daughter cannot understand it, nor can she speak it, but she's in love with it. Same difference. And you often wonder, how could you be in a house, growing up with your parents, and they're speaking German or Blackfeet or Japanese all around you, and you never learn 5 words, or except maybe a few dirty words, you know, or something like that, and use them on somebody once in a while. That in itself is a phenomena to study. That is itself a phenomenon. So what we did when we tried to come out of this, because it's obviously we're not going to walk up, and I figure myself the same way. I grew up in this home with Blackfeet all around me, and one of the typical end results of that where you cannot speak the language. And I am in fact an English professor by early training. It's like telling people you're a dentist, though. You don't bring it up too much. And yet here we are as Americans, delanguaged from all these nice languages it's had, and we all invariably hate taking English class because they want us to speak a different way than we do. And so we had to learn how to learn these languages quickly. During the time that Piegan Institute, because most of us involved in it were teachers or at least researchers or historians, we embraced the idea of attempting to find out an accelerated method to learn a language. Do you know, those of you in the room that have BA degrees and probably took French or Spanish or German or Spanish in college in order to graduate, I suspect you'd all starve to death in a Spanish restaurant. And in spite of your 38 credit hours of Spanish. And we know that, and in fact only 5 out of 100 people who take the standard course of instruction at a university level, only 5 out of 100 will ever learn that language to the point of being able to get a sandwich somewhere in Madrid. You know, my friend got on the boat and he thought he could speak French. And he ordered a nice French off the French menu, and he went on, and he thought he'd really done well, and they brought him a grapefruit. And you know, and being a good Montana boy, you know, he was really hoping for a steak. So we embarked about 3 or 4 years ago in investigating a variety of methods to learn how to learn languages quickly. And one of them that we embraced was from who we now call our chief guru, Chief Boohoo, the man who really opened up doors for us. And this is a gentleman named Dr. James Asher from San Jose State University. And Mr. Asher's group had been investigating for the last 20 years the means of how to learn language, and came up with one called total physical response. And total physical response is essentially how you learned at your mother and father's knee how to speak. And it's essentially coupling a physical movement with every possible word or combination. And as it was referred to earlier here, right brain, left brain, all of those things are part and parcel of it. We did find this, that it's extremely successful and it's very efficient and it absolutely works. And as a result, the majority of the people that we are involved with in our language studies have learned languages rather quickly to enable them to study it. In addition, we have been able to go into public schools who are very reluctant, not only to allow Blackfeet in there, but you must understand they are reluctant to let any other language in there, and they're rather hard-pressed to teach English as it is. At any rate, we have, in the last 4 or 5 years, been able to share our knowledge and share our pursuit and share our enthusiasm, and to incorporate this into some very intelligent, intellectual, sponsoring, spiritual, kind of enthusiastic ways that young children just go crazy for. And we've been very impressed with ourselves, and as well as extremely happy that we were able to find this man, Mr. Asher, to help us particularly in this effort. We have taught young children in Browning Public Schools, showed the techniques to them. The Grovons this summer, we spent 1 week with them in the Little Rockies. They brought literally one of the last speakers of their tribe. We camped out near a place called Big Warm, which is a natural hot springs in the Little Rockies. They put up their lodges, and we stayed there for a week, sharing the technique with them. And along with sign language that we've also involved ourselves in, and also pictographs, as was indicated earlier. We have taken pictographs off, the older pictographs, deciphered them, and used them in our technique. Ding, ding. Okay? So, how it works is simply this. We would show the picture, the sign, the word, in a variety of ways. And I can only tell you this, that most of the people involved do learn the language. And once you get someone involved in learning the language, you seem to have accomplished your real goal in life, and that is you've created a true believer. And there's nothing like a true believer when they are involved in your cause. You well know that. So I would hope that the little bit of this rambling wreck that I just laid out here, I feel like somebody's over my shoulder, and there obviously is. I would want to thank you for the opportunity for me to share with you briefly some of the current statuses of native languages, and certainly encourage you. I'll hang around here for a little while and visit with you individually if you have any other questions in regards to our effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darryl. Yeah, I want to introduce the next speaker, who is Jackie Parsons, also an enrolled member of the Blackfeet tribe and a lifelong resident who lives on a ranch near Star School with her husband Kenneth and 6 of her children. She's gone around the Indian circuit as far as schools are concerned. She went to Browning Public Schools, the Chamorro Indian School in Oregon, the Haskell Institute in Lawrence, Kansas. She's gone to the Flathead Community College, the Northern Montana College, and Indian Studies in the National Indian Court Judges Association. She's a former judge. She has worked as a secretary for the tribe, a nutrition technician, a home economic specialist, prosecutor and judge, as I said, for the tribe, and is now the executive director of the Northern Plains Indian Crafts Association, which is located at the Museum of the Plains Indian in Browning. So, this is Jackie.
Thank you. If you don't hear me, just kind of raise your hand and I'll adjust the microphone. But my presentation to you today is going to be on the educational movement of the Blackfeet. And one of the things that prompted me to write this book is the fact that I started visiting with a lot of elders when I was working in the nutrition program and found out that there's all these books written about Blackfeet people by non-Indians. And a lot of it's not true. So I thought, well, this is interesting. Maybe I should do something like that, and this is what prompted me to write the book. So I will do my presentation on the educational movement. Education. What is the meaning of education to education? To most people, education means acquiring knowledge. In the early days when the mighty red man was being conquered, education had a far different meaning. It meant becoming indoctrinated into a complete different culture while trying to retain their own original values. If the different races could accept people for what they are and not intimidate them into thinking they are subhuman, they would find that every race in the world has something genuine and unique to offer. In the case of the Indian people, they had a high form of democracy. They had a remarkable sense of, responsibility to their teachers, to their children. A child at a very early age was taught profound fundamentals of life, the men teaching the boys, the women teaching the girls. They lived hand in hand with nature, knowing how to survive in their surroundings. In 1836, there was approximately 18,000 Blackfeet Indians. During the next 3 years, smallpox was carried to Blackfeet camps. 2/3 of the population died from this disease. It was during this time that the Jesuit priests started their missionary work with the Blackfeet. They were the first white people to go into Blackfeet country. Due to the mistrust and hostility toward the priests, they left Blackfeet country and did not return until 3 years later in 1840. They found the Blackfeet confused and defeated. They could no longer defend their territory because of the small number that had survived the smallpox epidemic. The people probably realized that they had to trust someone, so they allowed the black robes to stay. Thus, the education of the Blackfeet began with these priests. They started teaching English and catechism, but immediately saw the need for a more lasting and stable development. The Jesuits' goal was to establish a mission in order to give the Blackfeet people stability, to survive in a foreign culture that was fast enveloping Blackfeet territory by white settlers. In looking back at this time period, one must remember that education not only meant learning about God and English, it meant learning a host of small things, like learning how to wear clothes, sleep in a bed, sit in a chair, use a knife and fork, button a button, to tell time and everything needed to know about foreign culture that they were being indoctrinated into. 19 years of painstaking work with the Blackfeet, the Jesuits' first mission school became a reality. Before I go into the different segments of the education of the Blackfeet, I would like to tell you that there were 5 different types of schools available to the Blackfeet. There was mission schools, government boarding schools on the reservation, government boarding schools off the reservation, government day schools, public and private schools on the Blackfeet reservation. So I will begin with the mission schools. In the year 1859, the first mission school was opened for the Blackfeet Indians near Shoto, Montana, which was reservation land at that time. 3 log cabins were erected and called the St. Peter's Mission. This was the first St. Peter's Mission. The site was abandoned in 1862 and moved to a more suitable location at the mouth of the Sun River. It became the new St. Peter's Mission. Up until that time, boys were the only ones taught. And the first second St. Peter's Mission burned down, and it was moved again to the new St. Peter's site, and that was still on the Sun River. The reason they didn't want to rebuild it, and it was decided to move the site and enlarge the school at that time because they were getting more students enrolled. In 1884, the Ursuline nuns arrived at St. Peter's Mission, and the girls were immediately initiated to education. Blackfeet students were continuing to attend this school and continued to attend it until it closed. In the year 1883, a small one-room mission school was opened at Robert, that is right across the Birch Creek River on the reservation. Only a few Indian children were taught due to the fact that they had to sneak across the Birch Creek River to be taught by the Catholic priests, because at that time they were parceled out to the Protestants because they would go, like one tribe would go to the Catholics, one would go to the Protestants. And even though the Catholics were the first to be on the reservation, we were given to the Protestants, so they had to sneak back over to their priests to learn what they were teaching them, because the Protestants were falling short from teaching them anything. So this became a small mission, and a few children that came to the priests were taught at that time. In 1887, Chief Whitecalf contributed land to the Jesuit priests to build a mission school for the Blackfeet. This was built and opened in 1890 on the Two Medicine River for 100 students ages 6 to 15 years of age. It closed in December 1939. Government boarding schools on the Blackfeet Reservation. In 1892, the Willow Creek School, a government boarding school, opened for 101 students. This school operated continuously until a fire destroyed the school and the site was moved to the Cut Bank Boarding Creek. In 1904, the Cut Bank Creek Boarding School was opened for 125 students. This school operated until 1934, when it closed for a period of 4 years. The reason for closure of this school, the Bureau was trying to phase out and shift the responsibility to the public school district. This school was reopened in the year 1937-38 due to pressure from the local public. At this time, it is still operating, but strictly as a boarding dormitory. Government day schools. The first government day schools opened in 1915. They were at Hart Butte, Old Agency, and Star School. These are the only 3 rural schools still operating today on the reservation. Croft, Chief All Over, Higgins, Fisher Flat, Mad Plume, Durham, Cold Feet, Swims Under, Upper Birch Creek, Little Badger, Heavy Breast, and Camp 9 opened in 1933 under the Public Work Administration's grants. These smaller schools were to phase out with the advent of better roads, consolidating with the larger rural schools. As funding of these schools were turned over to district management, economically it was not feasible to continue operating these small rural schools. It was more economical to bus these children to the larger remaining day schools or into Browning. Public and private schools on the reservation. The first public school opened at 4 Persons Agency at Choteau, Montana for 26 students in 1872. Lasted until 1876. The school closed because of poor attendance. Elton, a little town up in the Bab Valley, opened in 1898 for white children only. Elton was a silver and copper mining boom town located in the Bab Valley. It existed until 1900 when a new school was built on the St. Mary's River and called the Bab School. Another new site was chosen and a school building built in 1939 that still stands today. It's still in operation but annexed with School District Number 9 in 1972. The first public school opened in Browning in 1905 for 20 students. Due to the increase in enrollment, another room was added the following year. This did not take care of the heavy enrollment, and the school was taught in rented buildings until 1910 when a new school was built. This school was considered too great an expense to the district and was moved to the present site of the elementary school and had a dormitory attached to it. In 1920, the new Browning School opened at the present site of the elementary school and housed all 12 grades. Up to that time, it only went through 1 through 8. Mr. Douglas Gold was the first superintendent. In 1936, a new addition was added to the school under the WPA. In 1936, 100 years after the first white person set foot on Blackfeet land, the first 2 full-blooded Indians graduated from high school. A new school was completed in 1954, housing grades 9 through 12. In 1956, the K.W. Bergen School was completed for grades K through 3. In 1966, 5 portable classrooms were rented for grade 2. In 1967, the Vina Chatton School was completed for grades 4 through 6. Because of the heavy enrollment of the district, they had to rent the Catholic Center for grades 5. In 1974, a new junior high school was completed and started operation with a gym added in 1976. This filled the need for the enrollment at this time, but there will always be a need for new schools because of the increase in the enrollment. The old Bab School, New Bab School, Camp 9, Carway, Hilton's, Galbraith, Pescan, DeBray, Kraft, St. Mary's, DeWolf, Bird, Paisley, Cutfinger, Pontresina, Heavy Runner, Blackfeet, Croft Wren, Big Lake, Revis, Mad Plume, Seville, and Hamilton were the public and private schools that opened on the reservation. These schools were to open and close intermittently due to weather conditions, teacher shortage, family transiency, and funding. These schools housed grades 1 through 8. If a student was to continue his education, he either had to go to a government boarding school off the reservation, the family had to move into Browning, or the student had to board with relatives or live at the Browning boarding dormitory. Since the flood in 1964, approximately 25% of the reservation population had to relocate. This relocation was in or near the town of Browning. Today's schools on the reservation. From the numerous schools that once existed on the Blackfeet Reservation, we see only 4 of these schools operating today: Bab, Hart Butte, Star, and Browning. The Bab School has approximately 40 students enrolled, grades K through 8. Grades 7 and 8 have their choice of attending school at Bab or busing into Browning. Hart Butte is operating for grades K through 8 and have students attending there. And they just built a new high school there last year. Star is operating for grades 1 through 4 and have approximately 35 students attending. In 1974, the original school that was built in 1915 was condemned and destroyed in May of 1976. 4 trailers now house the students at Star School. They have since then built a new school there and are incorporated into that now. A Head Start and kindergarten building was constructed in 1969. Browning is the backbone for education on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation at this time. The Browning schools service 2,150 students K through 12. The system is now running buses to every part of the reservation. This is not only more economical to have the students centralized, but it gives a student a chance to compete scholastically since he is in a group with his peers. This system also gives the student a chance to participate in extracurricular activities, exposing him to a broader sense of values. The Browning school system today is a Class A accredited school system. Off-reservation boarding schools attended by the Blackfeet Reservation Indians, there was about 20% at this time attending these schools. Up to one time we had at least 50%. There's I'll just give you a list of the names because I think I'm running short of time, am I?
Another 5 minutes.
There was Genoa, Nebraska, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Flandreau, South Dakota, Chemawa, Oregon, Busby, Montana, Chilocco, Oklahoma, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Lawton, Oklahoma, Haskell, Kansas, Riverside, Oklahoma, Wahpeton, North Dakota, Concho, Oklahoma, Pierre, South Dakota, Fort Shaw, Montana, Intermountain, Utah. Funding these were all the government reservation government boarding schools that the Blackfeet did attend throughout the years. Funding for the schools has always been a problem. Most of the schools were always funded through government programs until up into 1934. They had the Johnson-O'Malley Act, and this act authorized the Secretary of Interior to enter into contracts with the states or territories for the education, medical attention, and social welfare of Indians. In 1936, the same act was amended by the state of Montana and used this money strictly for a hot lunch program for the American Indians who was 1/4 degree or over. Although this money was intended for supplemental money to consider the needs of Indian children that were not being met under other federal programs, it was not until 1969, under the direction of Mr. Earl Barlow, a Blackfeet Indian, that this money was taken from the lunch program and used for the purpose it was enacted for. It is now operating under PL 9363 for the purpose of self-determination and for Indian education. It goes on, they had Title I money, ESEA Act money that they were granted in 1965, and this program was for disadvantaged students to equalize educational benefits for deprived children who should be educated. 1976 for the funding. Up to 1979, there was approximately 29% county money, 39% state money, 30% federal money, and 2% other monies that operated School District 9, which costs approximately $4.6 million a year to operate. In reviewing the past 139 years, one can see that the Blackfeet people have progressed dynamically. However, one must never forget that the progress has been damaged with much bloodshed, heartache, prejudice caused mainly by government oppression. It is said time eases all pain. For the Blackfeet people, yes, time is easing the pain of losing the culture they once possessed. It is sad that the future generations will be deprived of sharing a way of life that wanted for nothing. To the Indian people of today and to the coming generations, will they preserve what is left of the beautiful Blackfeet culture, never forgetting the proud race of people that they are descended from? Will they strive for progress and lead their people successfully in the coming generations through education, the only recognizable peaceful method? These questions will be answered in the years to come. Let us hope that through education, the next 139 years will be peaceful and prosperous. for this proud race of people.
Thank you very
Okay, our second speaker today is Michael Ober. Michael is the director of the library at Flathead Valley Community College. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in history from the University of Montana, and for the past 23 years has worked as a ranger at Glacier Park, 12 of those years at the Lake McDonald Ranger Station. This experience has given him the opportunity to get to know quite well the people that, I guess, Glacierites call inholders, those people who still own private cabins within the boundaries of Glacier Park, and also for him to explore the history of those properties and those families. So today, Michael is going to talk about two of the early innkeepers at Lake McDonald.
Mary, thank you, and good morning to you all. Welcome. It is a picture in contrasting personalities, business styles, and lifestyles that I want to present to you today. And we will get in right away to my slides, and we will begin our discussion of Frank Kelly and John Lewis, two individuals who I suspect are not very well known out of this region. And that's fine, because I think if we remember the words of Emerson, who reminded us that there is properly no history, only biography, then it's necessary and appropriate to delve into the lives of some people who are well known, like Charlie Russell, and some who are less well known, such as John Lewis, and even to a lesser extent, Frank Kelly. We can get some lights out. I want to launch right into an overview of Lake McDonald and the personalities and properties there, and specifically these two individuals.
Why don't you go, can you flip it to power on there? Great, thanks.
There we go. As you look at the lake, setting for our discussion, it's necessary to know that this is a region untouched by many people before the 1890s. And it is a place where folks came to, as Liz indicated, relax and recreate, and that is essentially what drew our two individuals to this area. As you look at Mr. Lewis, John Ellsworth Lewis, and this is a much later photograph of him. He does not have his long dark hair and his dark mustache. It's a grainy picture taken from a newspaper. This picture was taken just before his death in 1934. He is the more prominent of our shared individuals, much more well known, with great stature through northwest Montana, and we will get to him in a moment. But it is the fellow that I want to begin with, the rugged individual Frank Kelly, who we want to discuss a little bit about early on. Mr. Kelly was born in Dubuque, Iowa, a flatlander, if you will, 1855. He grew up on a farm, and he received only about a 7th grade education, as nearly as I can tell. And at age 19, he left home. He had a large family, and was essentially kicked out of that family, very little to eat, very little to do in Iowa. He traveled north to the woods of Minnesota and took a job as a bull cook in a lumbering camp. It is there that he fashioned some lasting and enjoyable associations with things which would pay him off later handsomely: wood and water. He spent some time rafting logs down the northern Mississippi and worked for some time there in some logging camps. He came west to Astoria, Oregon, later on, where he remarked that it rained too much. He worked back and forth between logging camps in Oregon and Northern California, and last went back to Astoria, where he marked it was still raining too much. Went down to San Francisco and took passage on a sailing vessel loaded with lumber. Sailed around Cape Horn to Le Havre, France, then to Paris, then to London, and then to New York, and back to Wisconsin. And he first shows up in Montana in the year 1883. He was employed by the Northern Pacific Railroad and lived in Livingston for a while, putting out logs and ties for the railroad. He then went back to the east and decided that this was the place he wanted to be. And for a period of 20 years after some wandering, he came to the valley that he would ultimately settle in. And as you look at this early day map, a much exaggerated map, which shows, if you will, a little bit larger than life McDonald Lake up here near the town of Belton, which you see an early day photo of here. This is the place he came to land, and after all, his wanderings were all done, and this is the place that he determined that he would settle in. He would have crossed the middle fork of the Flathead River and worked his way down through the rough road that was being hacked out by the settlers at that area and come to Apgar, the little village of Apgar at the foot of the lake. It is from there that the view that he saw inspired him, as others, and it captivated him enough to where he determined that he would make a homestead there. He hooked up with another gentleman who was employed by the Great Northern also, a fellow named Denny Como, and together they fashioned a log dugout out of a black cottonwood tree and paddled around this lake. At the head of the lake, where you're looking right now, they selected their home sites and their homesteads. On the right-hand side, Denny Como selected a spot near Snyder Creek, and on the left-hand side, Kelly selected his homestead near what ultimately would be called locally Kelly Creek. It, as the Daily Interlake described, the site, quote, gave Kelly some wonderful timber, a nice little bay, and a good stream of ice-cold water, which there entered the lake. The year was 1892. Kelly was single, 37 years old, and so began Kelly's camp. A man accustomed to working with wood, he owned and operated his own little portable sawmill. He began immediately to erect a cabin for himself, and he also built cabins for others around the lake, and some other guest cabins, which he determined to rent out to some of the visitors who began then coming to this area. A lot of attention was being drawn to to this area, which will soon become Glacier Park, by the Great Northern, and it was to those rail-borne visitors that Kelly determined to give some accommodations. Kelly, I guess, and Lewis, I guess, can be given credit for establishing the real genesis of visitor accommodations in this area. The real earliest of tourist resorts, of log resorts, of overnight accommodations for those guests pictured here came from Lewis and Kelly. I guess when you put together somebody's life and you begin to assemble the pieces of their past, it's interesting for us historians to try to find that one little piece of evidence that would make them unique, right? That would make that person stand out from all the others. And try, though I might, to distort the historical picture, there's not much can be said about Frank Kelly that is really unique, really outstanding. A couple of examples. It would be nice to say that Kelly owned and operated the first steam-powered vessel on Lake McDonald. It's not true. George Snyder owned that boat. It would be nice to say that Frank Kelly really was the guy that located Sperry Glacier. It's not true either. Although it is clear that Kelly and others around the Lake McDonald area did know of the existence of that glacier and others. But it is to Lyman B. Sperry, pictured here in the middle of your picture, that credit goes. Sperry was in the employ of the Great Northern Railroad and was sent out here to find interesting attractions for visitors, for all those rail-borne visitors, for Hill's Line. Typically, I guess, Sperry took the credit, and Frank Kelly, who was a guide frequently with the Sperry entourage, had little credit to receive. He is a man shown in this picture, right here, always in the background, a humble man, not very well educated, didn't write very much, read even less. He took little credit for it, while Sperry got all the credit for finding and locating some of the geological features around that area. This did not settle very well with the local papers, and I want to read you what the editor of the Interlake thought about that. To the people of Kalispell, Dr. Sperry was a typical Eastern tenderfoot who came in a Pullman, a dapper little man dressed in a cutaway coat, knickerbockers tucked into polished riding boots, a perky fedora, a stiff white collar, an ascot tie, who explored the wilds under the guidance of frontiersmen like Gadoon, Kelly, Como, Christensen, and others who were already familiar with them. His explorations were a joke, and his discoveries absurdly ridiculous. The editor of this Interlake and the general public keenly resents his wholesale giving of place names and considered him an interloper. Nonetheless, he got the credit. Kelly, in 1897, withdrew from the guiding business, which he said he had little stomach for, and devoted his attentions to the establishment of his little cabin camp. 1897 is also, if you recall, the year that this area was designated as a National Forest Reserve, and therefore all homesteading ceased at that point. 1897 is also the year that he married his wife Emmeline, a woman 23 years younger than he. Together they set about to establishing and improving upon Kelly's camp. Some of the homes you see here were all built by Emmeline and Mr. Kelly. The log work was handsome. Kelly, in one picture you will see here soon, had some of the largest hands I've seen in a picture of a man. That's typical in people who work with logs most of their life. A gentleman named Austin Weichert, who built many cabins in Glacier National Park, also had some extremely large hands. And this is some of his handiwork. He built later on in years, when he owned Kelly's camp, his own little micro hydropower generating plant working off of Kelly's Creek. And since they lived there year-round, they had their own store of supplies and a little root cellar. One of Kelly's great loves was for boats. And it is certain that on boats like this and others, this is his first boat, the Emmeline, named for his wife, that individuals like Charlie Russell rowed up and down the lake, because as you know, there was no road along the lake at that time in the early days. And the only way you could get up and down to Kelly's camp from Apgar or to Lewis's hotel across the lake was by boat. This boat is pictured on the landing skids right in front of Kelly's camp. And I do recall as a child when I would grow up and spend summers at Kelly's camp, the skids are still there. And in the bottom of the lake are still handfuls of nails from where that vessel was burned after long years of lack of use. The nails are still there, the skids are still there, and the skids still show some scorch marks from when it was burned in low water times. But his love was for boats, and that's what he became known for. Now, whether they knew it or not, Frank Kelly and John Lewis were on converging historical paths. Consider this, they were both, ironically enough, born in Iowa, a couple of flatlanders who came to the mountainous area here. They were born 10 years apart, and in 1865, John Ellsworth Lewis came to the earth, and he was born, ironically enough, less than 100 miles from where Frank Kelly was born. That's where the similarities end, because while Frank Kelly went off to work in the woods, John Lewis elected to go to college, and he played baseball and football at the University of Iowa for 3 years. He ultimately received a law degree from the University of Iowa. And in the year 1889, he came out to the new state of Montana as a catcher on a professional baseball team in Helena, where he received the untold sum of $2,500 for playing baseball, professional baseball here in our new state. That lasted a year. But it was while he was in Helena, Liz, that he had his first encounter with Charlie Russell. And Charlie Russell shared with him some interesting anecdotes about the Indians of northwest Montana, painted for him some pictures, and got him started and interested in the collecting of Indian memorabilia, something which he would do for the rest of his life. In fact, upon his death, His sister, Lewis's sister, donated his entire collection of Indian artifacts to the University of Montana. Included there were some original Russell pieces of art. These are things which John Lewis, a contemporary of Russell, collected and gathered all through his life, because they certainly did know each other. They spent a lot of enjoyable times with each other here on Lake McDonald. In 1890, Lewis came to the Flathead Valley. Even though he had a law degree, he determined not to practice that. He took instead a job with Ramsdale's General Store in the town of DeMarsville. At this time, the Upper Flathead was an active area in fur trading, and it was that job that he held for many years, actively engaged in the fur trading activity with the Indians all the way from Fort Steele in Canada down to the Bitterroot Valley. He traveled extensively. Doubtless he knew and got associated with most of the tribes in the Northwest. Lewis is probably best known, although he was a hotel keeper, for his activities as a fur trader. He was at one time the largest private marketer of raw furs in the Pacific Northwest. That's why, in some part, when you go to Lake McDonald Lodge, the hotel that he ultimately built, a lot of the furs that you see there are from his collection. And he had, in fact, a furrier store and a furrier room in that hotel. So, safe to say that Lewis built his initial fortune in that kind of a business, and it was a position that he would hold and an activity that he would engage in for over 40 years. But for our portion of the discussion, Lewis and his wife Olive, they had no children incidentally, are best known for their activities in hotels and innkeeping. Lewis was no dummy, of course, and he recognized early on that the attention being drawn to this area by the Great Northern and others, and Grinnell, for example, would ultimately lead to national park status. Lewis was a staunch Republican and became associated with that party and the Theodore Roosevelt family early on. Because of those connections, he was the receiver, appointed receiver of public monies. In that capacity, he came to know of and acquired large tracts of land throughout northwest Montana, in the area that was to become Glacier Park, and also down in the Columbia Falls area where he owned the Gaylord Hotel, remodeled it with another gentleman, and made it one of the finest innkeeping facilities on the Great Northern's High Line. He also owned the Columbia Hotel, and he owned large tracts of land within the Columbia Falls town site. He bought for $8,500 420 acres of lakeshore property on Lake McDonald. Included in that was the old Snyder Hotel, shown here. And he began to improve upon that property. This property, of course, was located directly across the lake from Kelly's cabin camp. So in some ways, you see, both these individuals became competing, if you will, businessmen, but somehow they did establish and maintain and sustain a sort of a business-like symbiosis in which they worked closely with each other. But it is not clear to me whether either individual was very well acquainted with each other, although being on the lake, they must have had to have been. But because of their differing social backgrounds, the record does not indicate that they were all that close as individuals. Certainly they operated their businesses in a business-like manner, and one did ultimately overshadow the other. But still they managed to sustain and maintain the kind of activities which gave rise to the earliest of innkeeping facilities in this area. Lewis, I guess, is best known for his hotel, the Lewis's Hotel, or Lewis's Glacier Hotel. It was in the year 1913 that he assembled an army of workers, and with some plans in hand, which a Cutter and Malgrim architectural firm had drawn up for him. Cutter and Malgrim designed the Davenport Hotel in Spokane, and they were given, incidentally, free rein as to cost in the construction and design of this structure. Lewis directed them to spare no cost, because he said, I want something which will rival those hotels currently being constructed by the Great Northern. And in that respect, I think he succeeded. Lewis's Hotel, shown here at its completion in 1914, was and is still, I think, a central focus site for visitors and guests to the McDonald Valley. When it opened in that summer, there was a gala extravaganza for opening. Special fares were designated for people to come from Kalispell on the Great Northern Rail line. Again, you couldn't get there except on boat. You had to go to Apgar and then take a boat up to the head of the lake. There was a week-long celebration of fireworks each evening, roping and packing contests by local guides, high diving events, foot races, a gala ball, a brass band, etc. At this time, of course, Lewis was very well known throughout the area, and a lot of his guests and friends were from this area and from elsewhere. Let me read you what the Interlake indicated about this particular hotel. It says, the acme of beauty and design. It was the last word in personality. Here he enjoyed the friendship of the nation's great who came there to vacation. Here Charlie Russell, Irvin S. Cobb, and Mary Roberts Reinhardt, and others of the nation's celebrities came every year to sense the frontier personality of John E. Lewis. Charlie Russell painted gift pictures for Mr. Lewis, smoked Bull Durham, sat atop the corral fence, and talked to the kids. The cowboy artist would occasionally dress up to satisfy conventioners, but he always felt uneasy. He never forgot his old friends who appreciated informality as well as he did. Here he often said that he was getting a hell of a price for them pictures. He gave them away to his